What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Numberfire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com and FanDuel's YouTube page. We are taking a look back at week number 11, breaking down all the big takeaways for NFL DFS. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for Numberfire. Brandon, week 11, mostly in the books. Some good, some really bad. How you doing today?
Yeah, some good, some bad. I think I got caught in the middle, at least. I mean, we were in on some plays who didn't work out. Brian Hill, unfortunately, not the best workload, not the worst workload. Had a touchdown called back. Could have been way worse. Could have been way better, but overall, it was a fine week for me. Just kind of forgettable. What about you?
I had two quarterbacks to whom I had equal amounts of exposure at the top. One was Lamar Jackson, that was good. The other was Deshaun Watson, and that was definitely not good. So it was a weird day because I had a lot of Lamar or Deshaun. I had a lot of DeAndre Hopkins, and obviously the Panthers guys too. And Christian McCaffrey was great. He was great, but having both those teams hit the very low end of their expectation in the same slate really does sway things quite a bit. I had enough Josh Allen, I had enough John Brown, Calvin Ridley, where it wasn't a disaster, but having two teams, two offenses to which you have pretty heavy exposure, both fall completely flat and hit literally fifth percentile outcomes for them. It was not good. That's how I'd phrase that.
Yeah, not good by any means. And I think even I might have overthought things a little bit. I loved Calvin Ridley. I always kind of love him. And I thought, well, he'll be a bit more popular and I can pivot to someone. And I kind of moved to DJ Chark, so it wasn't terrible, right. But could have had both.
Right. The 5K receivers were nuts. You had Calvin Ridley, John Brown, Deebo Samuel did well without a touchdown. You had DJ Chark blow up. So it was a good week to spend down at wide receiver. The problem was it was just everything else that didn't exactly go to plan. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back through week 11, recap all that went down. If you are a new listener, do not forget that we do this every Monday and Thursday right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and on the FanDuel YouTube page. We record at 9 o'clock every Monday and then 10 o'clock every Thursday. Thanksgiving week will be a little bit different. We'll talk about that on Thursday. But if you want to get every podcast right as it is posted, make sure you subscribe to the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review as well, because those do help us out a ton. Let's start off week 11, though, by going back to the Steelers against the Browns. And the Browns offense looked alive at times during this game, but it doesn't matter. Everything is totally overshadowed by the Myles Garrett incident. And if we're talking about this strictly from a DFS perspective, it's a pretty significant loss for that Browns defense. What'd you see in this game, Brandon? Besides, I guess including that brawl too.
We can skip past it. We know Garrett's out. He's going to appeal because I guess you can't be suspended indefinitely. So who knows? But for now, he's out. So that is a big hit. But for the Browns, Baker Mayfield threw for 2 touchdowns on 32 attempts. His second straight game with 2 touchdown passes after not having done that all season. His expected points per dropback were league average in this game. His success rate, not very good. So that is a little bit concerning for me. And those are Numberfire metrics, of course. Mayfield's been pretty rough all season. I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback. I like Baker Mayfield, but it just hasn't been there. Now, this was a tough pass defense, short week, divisional opponent, but I'm still not really changing my mind entirely on this offense. He did give Odell Beckham 10 targets. He had Kareem Hunt with 8. Jarvis Landry had 7. Nobody else had more than 2, so it would definitely be nice if we can keep trusting the high-volume options, being those 3. In 2 games with Kareem Hunt, Odell Beckham has a 33% target share, followed by Landry and Hunt at 25%. Beckham has 5 of 8 deep targets, 59% of the air yards in that 2-game sample. Beckham's role is good within the offense, hasn't led to reliable production. Eventually he'll blow up, so hopefully we can catch that on the right week. Kareem Hunt here played 55% of the snaps after getting 54% in his debut with the Browns. Nick Chubb, though, played 72% this week. He was at 81% in Week 10. Hunt has 17 targets in these two games. Chubb has had 5. Chubb, though, has had 47 of 57 carries between them. Chubb's role really not drastically different by any means than it was before Kareem Hunt. It is reasonable to be worried about some receiving production with Hunt in the lineup, but still Chubb's role mostly unchanged. And they host the Dolphins in Week 12, so let's hope that this is...
Light them up, baby!
Yeah. For the Steelers, I mean, they're kind of a mess all over. Juju Smith-Schuster left with a concussion. He played 22 snaps. Deontay Johnson also had a concussion. James Conner played 13 snaps, leaving again with his aggravating his shoulder injury. Mason Rudolph lost nearly 26 expected points on 48 dropbacks. He's been around league average on the full season, but it's kind of from avoiding sacks. He's not really losing points on sacks. His actual passing metrics are well off the NFL average. The lead target getters in this game were Vance McDonald and Johnny Holton with 7, Jalen Samuels with 6, James Washington with 5, Juju, Deontay Johnson, and Tevin Jones with 4. Holton did have 5 of 12 deep attempts, but it was really only James Washington with an 85% snap rate who played reliable snaps throughout the full game. I mean, we don't know if Juju's going to be out. We don't know about Deontay Johnson. Even without them, I'm not really in love with this offense. James Conner played 18% of the snaps, like I said, but it was Trey Edmonds who was at 47% and Jalen Samuels at 34%. So really no player in this offense has a workload worth going hard at. Even Jalen Samuels without Conner, or really any receiver without Juju. They do play in Cincinnati next week, so that could be something, but I'm not super excited.
Yeah, and a big part of the reason why we, like in the past, have gone at this offense was because they were efficient and because they had a very good offensive line. And not having Pouncey is going to downgrade that offensive line quite a bit. Like, for me, the biggest red flags for a position to miss are left tackle and center. And Pouncey's a center. He's among the best centers in football. That's a pretty big draw away. Jalen Samuels in that game did have 6 targets. He had 7 the game before when James Conner was out. It's like he's going to get work, but like, what's the upside, I guess? I don't know. Like, I feel like he's kind of in the James White zone where like the odds that he hits 10 FanDuel points are pretty high, but the odds that he hits 20 are very low. We'll talk about the Browns plenty on Thursdays. I don't think we need to talk about them too much here, but let's assume that Conner does miss. What are your thoughts? Like, is there anyone here who you can feel really good about, even in a plus matchup?
No, not good about. I mean, it'll depend on the slate, but it's an 11-game main slate next week. That's pretty full. I just don't envision too many scenarios where I'm loading up on Steelers because, again, nobody jumps out and nobody feels very safe. And that game probably won't be a shootout based on what the Bengals can return against a pretty good defense. So
right, and we get Baker against the Dolphins, Sam Darnold against the Raiders. Those are all your quarterbacks right there. Yeah. It's a gym week. That's all I'm going to say. It's a gym week. I am pumped for Week 12 because of that. It's going to be a lot of fun. In this week's Number Fire FanDuel free play, Levis Scott 2011 took home the top prize with a score of 183.98. They had Lamar Jackson all by himself and paired him with John Brown, Calvin Ridley, and Deebo Samuels. They went 3 for 3 on those mid-range wide receivers. And for that big day, Levis Scott 2011 gets a free subscription to Number Fire Premium and some cash. If you want in on next week's contest with more premium and cash on the line, check out Thursday's preview podcast and listen for the URL. Let's move now to the Cowboys at the Lions. Dak Prescott, yet again, awesome game. He averaged 0.51 passing net expected points per dropback and threw for 444 yards. Dak is playing like one of the best quarterbacks in football right now. So even in tough matchups, at least at home, he's been playing for DFS. We will be tested on that next week because they're on the road against New England. Dak is good enough, playing well enough right now where I would not entirely write them off, though. Ezekiel Elliott scored twice. Once was on a reception, which is good, but it was one of just 3 targets for the day. The issues for Elliott that we discussed before are still there. He has 0, 3, and 3 targets the past 3 games since their bye week, and he can still have big days, which is what he showed here. But this really dings his cash game appeal and hurts his odds of reaching his ceiling if he doesn't score twice as he did on Sunday. Amari Cooper was still banged up throughout the game. He played just 55% of the snaps, but he finished with 8 targets. His being banged up, though, allowed Michael Gallup and Randall Cobb to both go over 100 yards. Gallup had 13 targets, his second straight game in double digits. In the 5 full games that they played with everyone at full go, and you could potentially toss this one out because Cooper was not full. Cooper has 25.1% of the targets and Gallup is at 24.6%, but Cooper has 41% of the deep targets, Randall Cobb at 28%, Gallup is at 17%. So I think that because Cooper is very clearly not at full health, we should lower him a smidge until he starts practicing a bit more, because that would indicate that he's getting healthier. That in turn does bump up both Gallup and Cobb a bit, favoring Gallup by a lot between those two, but I think that Cobb is in play given that he has gotten some deep work and that he's getting a lot of targets right now. But overall, we do want pieces in this offense. So even with Cobb's overall shares being lower, he is still in play. Their right tackle, La'el Collins, got banged up again, and he was hurt coming in, but it sounds like he'll be okay. They don't sound super concerned. Collins has been awesome this year, so at least keep an eye on that one for sure. The Lions actually played pretty well offensively, and Jeff Driscoll was a part of that. He had 0.24 passing net expected points per dropback, which is above average. They were super run heavy, so it'll be hard to expect volume to the passing offense, but we can maybe not write off the passing game here, assuming Stafford misses more time. And Driscoll actually had some rushing juice. He's a fast dude. Like, again, he was moved to receiver this preseason. He has some athleticism. That's good for him for DFS. The problem there is that Driscoll really spread things out. He has in his 2 starts. Kenny Golladay leads with 21% of the targets. Then is Danny Amendola at 19% and Marvin Jones at 16%. But Jones has 7 deep targets with Golladay at 6. So Driscoll has been opening things up a bit, and that does matter. So I'm way more okay with this team than I was previously. Golladay is 1, Marv is 2, but I do think we still need to downgrade this team a decent amount from where they were with Stafford, because he was playing really good football. When he comes back, we can be excited again. But for right now, proceed with caution. The Lions signed Bo Scarborough to their practice squad and then promoted him to the active roster this week, and he got a lot of work. He had 14 out of 19 carries for running backs. That was with no targets, though. Scarborough played 49% of the snaps, and it was a pretty neutral script throughout. He ran just 9 routes according to Pro Football Focus, so Scarborough is fine. We know that he can run the ball effectively. He did in college. He's a huge dude, but I'm not going to go there yet. We would need pretty extreme circumstances to do so, and I'm not sure that the Lions can blow out any teams with Jeff Driscoll at quarterback, so very much proceeding with caution here with regards to those guys. Brandon, I want to talk about the Cowboys, though, because Dak Prescott has been lights out all year long. I think he's playing like one of the best quarterbacks in football right now, but they go on the road to face New England. Have they been good enough where you can consider Dak and the pieces in the passing game against such a good secondary?
Yeah, in the right game formats on FanDuel, so tournaments. I don't think that on an 11 game main slate I will land on any Cowboys in a cash game against just such a good defense, but by no means are they just written off. Dak's been so good. I mean, hopefully Cooper is healthy, but I mean, if not, Michael Gallup's a good receiver, which he's a heat check favorite. We like Michael Gallup, so I mean, he has he has options, he has weapons. Like, they're definitely not written off by any means.
And the good thing is they have multiple ways to beat you, because that's the Patriots' MO, is trying to shut down your opposing best option. Well, if you shut down Cooper, we can go to Cobb. If you shut down Cobb, we can go to Gallup. It's a good offense. And like, we joke about Zeke getting terrible usage, but he's an effective runner at times. He hasn't been as good this year, but I know we've made a joke out of Zeke and everyone likes trash on Zeke. He is an effective runner at times. And if the Patriots say run the ball against us, I would bet the Cowboys would take that bait. And I would guess that'd be the game plan for the Patriots defense in that.
Yeah, that might be the only problem is we don't know what the Patriots are going to force them.
I'm pretty sure they're going to force them to run. And probably. I think that Kellen Moore, I almost said Kellen Clemens. That's like the second time I've almost done that. Kellen Moore will take the bait. Kellen Clemens is the other backup quarterback named Kellen from the 2010s. He is not the OC for the Cowboys. I think they will take that bait happily, but we'll talk more about that on Thursday. Let's move now to the Jets at Washington. Brandon, Sam Darnold looking pretty good in this game, and I think that he's living up to what we said about him pretty much this entire year. He's very volatile. It means he can have very bad games, but he can also have very good games. What did you see overall in this game for the Jets?
Yeah, so Darnold, 293 yards, 4 touchdowns with a pick. According to Number Fire's metrics, he was 4 times the NFL average on a per-play basis in terms of expected points. Since returning, he's actually been well shy of NFL average in efficiency if you include his game against the Patriots. But outside of that, he's basically done what you should do against weak opponents. So he's matchup dependent, but he's come through or done at least what we should expect in good matchups. So that's definitely a plus for Sam Darnold and his receivers. Jamison Crowder here had a team-high 8 targets, followed by Ryan Griffin and Demaryius Thomas with 5. Robbie Anderson clocked just 3. No Jet, though, had multiple deep targets in a 34-17 win. Griffin balled out. He had 109 yards on 5 catches. Crowder also scored here, had 76 yards. Since Darnold's return, it's Jamison Crowder who leads with a 23% target share, followed by Demaryius Thomas at 20%. Robbie Anderson is at 17%, and Le'Veon Bell is at 14%. Anderson in that sample has 31% of the deep targets. Thomas is at 24%. Crowder is at 16%. Nobody's particularly bankable, I don't think, among their pass catchers. In this offense, I think the pecking order for me remains unchanged. It's Crowder for safety. It's Anderson for upside. Demaryius Thomas has a little bit of both, but I'd rank him third easily. For the backfield here, Le'Veon Bell, 18 carries for just 59 yards, but did score. Bilal Powell had 7 carries. Other running backs combined for 6 more carries, and Le'Veon Bell played 57% of the snaps, according to Pro Football Focus. So it's a little bit concerning. Bell has not really been a must-play by any means. I was playing a lot of Le'Veon Bell earlier in the year. It's not even so much the role, it's just kind of the offense. So I'll still play Bell in the right spots, but he's a tournament play only for me. The Jets host the Raiders in Week 12, so could be a fun one. For Washington, yeah.
It'll be excited. Fun.
I'm excited to hear your thoughts, yeah.
Yeah.
Washington, 41 pass plays, 20 rush plays, which is like a record. Played from behind most of the game. Dwayne Haskins averaged 6.1 yards per attempt, lost 0.21 expected points per dropback. The NFL average is a positive 0.1, so not good there by any means. Terrible success rate. Kind of looked lost out there at times. It's unfortunate. Maybe he's just not quite ready, which, what are you going to do? Problematically, though, on top of that, he spread out his 32 targeted throws. Kelvin Harmon had 6 targets. He was the only one with more than 4, and 7 total pass catchers had at least 3 targets. So that's not good. In Haskins starts, no player has more than an 18.5% target share, which is Terry McLaurin. He's thrown deep just 5 times. One of them was called back on hold. Terry McLaurin had a, I think, 67-yard touchdown. So it's not nothing, but it ended up being nothing. And this passing game really is just a mess. The running back snaps here, surprising. Wendell Smallwood, 46%. Darius Geis, 33%. Adrian Peterson, 28%, according to Pro Football Focus. Peterson had 9 carries. Geis had 7. Each had 2 targets. It was pretty even in the first half. Smallwood had 3 targets, but no carries. They're going to want to run the ball when they can. Could be like a 50-50 split for Peterson and Geis. Doesn't seem like the offense is going to be scoring points, so that's not fun for DFS. They host the Lions in Week 12. Could be a spot where they can run, but even then, you can't bank on any Washington player right now.
I'd agree with that. Let's talk about the Jets, though, because I think we've seen them do well in 2 consecutive plus matchups, but they also face the Dolphins in a on paper plus matchup and fell short. So what is your degree of confidence in this Jets offense heading into a game against Oakland where we're going to want to have exposure to them in DFS?
Confidence is not a word I'd use.
Yeah.
Appeal, there's still appeal
yeah.
for if Sam Darnold does what he should be able to do against a defense that's not elite by any means. The total is 47.5 according to FanDuel Sportsbook. So it could be a bit of a back and forth game. The Jets are actually 3.5-point home underdogs, so that could be a nice neutral script, high scoring. I'll have exposure to it, but again, confidence not really a word I'd use for the Jets. What about you?
That's the Robbie script. I hate it because he's not getting any volume. It's terrible, and I don't want to use him in that spot. But I think that Jamison Crowder has a lot of appeal actually. So name that salary for Jamison Crowder at home against Oakland next week.
63.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I'd probably go a little bit closer to like 65. And he is 65. So very appropriate. We have Robbie down at 54. That might still be low enough.
You're going to be.
Yeah, I don't think I can't go that hard at him given his role. It's not been good enough.
You say that Monday.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough. Ryan Griffin's 56, and his target total was down in week 10, but that was because that's the one game Chris Herndon actually played snaps. So I think that for him, he's been getting enough volume recently, and he's actually showed a little bit of upside where Griffin is an option at 56. I would not say he is a great option, but he is someone I'd be willing to consider at that number when I'm stacking that game, which I very much will. Let's move here to the Bills at the Dolphins, and we had been waiting all year long for ceiling games out of Josh Allen and John Brown, and we finally got them for both guys. And not shockingly, it came against the Dolphins. Who could have predicted that? Allen had another rushing touchdown on 7 attempts. John Brown had 14 targets, turned them into 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. And both of those guys are high ceiling plays if they're in a good matchup where the opposing team can keep pace a bit and push them. That's what happened on Sunday. And that's not going to happen all the time. But when it does, you can go hard at those two guys, and you should. The only other DFS relevant guy here is Devin Singletary, and he might have a bit of murkiness here. He fumbled twice on Sunday, and he did lose some work to Frank Gore down the stretch as a result, but Singletary did play a bit after that. He set a new season high at 74% of the snaps. Singletary had 15 carries and 1 target. I think he will get more passing down work than that going forward, so I do still like him. But keep in mind the fumbling issues and that Gore can jump in and steal some work in close to the goal line. Devontae Parker had another big day, though he was matched up with Tre'Davious White. So impressive day for Devontae Parker. He turned 10 targets into 135 yards. In the 2 games without Preston Williams, Parker has 26% of the targets. He has 10 in both games, and 4 of those 20 targets have been deep. So really good role for Parker. Mike Gesicki has 6 targets in both games. So you could go there, but we should probably tie our tight ends to better offenses. Parker, though, is fully in play. The backfield is bad. Kalen Ballage had 9 of 11 running back carries along with 6 targets, and he also scored, but he finished with 17 total yards. And Patrick Laird got 6 targets late in the game while playing 23% of the snaps. This team is in evaluation mode. So we're not assured Ballage will continue to get this volume, and that combined with his lack of talent and the terrible offense means we can ignore. Maybe it's not a lack of talent. I shouldn't say that. It's a bad offense. I can't judge his talent. So maybe not a lack of talent, but lack of productivity in this offense. Brandon, I want to talk to you about Devin Singletary, though, because his snap rate did go up, but the passing down work seems to be a bit volatile. In the 3 games since he got a bigger role, he has 4, I believe 6, and then 1 targets. It's just kind of inconsistent, and we know that there is still the possibility that he gets vultured by Frank Gore. And it's not even vultured. He's not the true goal line back.
Yeah. It's not a vulture situation.
Right, exactly. Like, we know that coming in. It's not CJ Ham stealing carries at the goal line here. But name that salary for Devin Singletary. How low would it need to be for you to account for the inefficiencies in his profile for you to go there at home against Denver?
So he was 65 for week 11. I'd still play him. I'd still be interested if he were around like 62.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit higher at 65. But like, he didn't change a whole lot for me yesterday, but like the lack of receiving work was disappointing. So I thought he was underpriced at 65 yesterday.
That's the difference.
Yeah,
I thought he should have been about 65. So
yeah, and he's 63 now. I think that's fine.
Okay.
Like, he's not a priority. It's hard for him to be a priority given the concerns that we have around Gore, or almost 2 fumbles. But, he's an option there, I would say, at $6,300. Let's move now to the Jaguars at the Colts. Nick Foles came back and didn't matter because the Colts were awesome here. They won 33-13, but a big injury here to watch is Marlon Mack, who it sounds like has a broken hand.
Yeah, I also saw a quote from Mack. I saw a notification that popped up and said he's going to get an x-ray on his hand. And then I saw within 10 seconds or so, it seemed like it was a quote from Marlon Mack said, "I should be good," or something like that. So,
always take what players say with a major grain of salt.
Yeah.
But I feel like breaking your hand would probably be a bad thing. But he's not going to play Thursday.
Yeah.
So at least for that one, he's not going to play. It's just more so beyond then.
Yeah.
What's going to happen. But players are weird, man. Like, it takes a very unique type of mindset to be a player in the NFL. I can never do that. Kudos to those who can. But you got to be a special, interesting kind of human.
Yeah. I mean, so Mack here still, even with the early exit, had 14 carries for 109 yards and a touchdown. Played 33% of the snaps. No targets. I know that he didn't play a lot, but he's really kind of become a run-only player in this offense, which is unfortunate. But they leaned on Jonathan Williams in this game without Mack. He played 45% of the snaps and had 13 carries, turned that into 116 yards. Nyheim Hines played 38% of the snaps. If Mack were to miss, long-term, back when they're on the main slate, not just on a short week on Thursday, it should be Williams who gets the early down work, Hines who gets the passing down work. So don't love either of those situations, but it would depend on the prices and the matchup there. But in another game without T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal led with 6 targets, had just 2 catches for 17 yards, though. Eric Ebron, Hines, and Marcus Johnson each had 4 targets. Despite a 66% snap rate, Jack Doyle did not get a target. Eric Ebron, by comparison, played 45% of the snaps and again had 4 targets. Hilton didn't practice this week, so could be out again in Week 12 against the Texans on that Thursday night, short week. Pascal should lead in targets again. I don't really love this offense overall. The tight ends are such a headache. On a single game slate, it's completely different. But if you're playing, anything resembling a slate with more than 4 games, I just have a hard time with this offense and what they've done without T.Y. Hilton. For the Jaguars, though, Nick Foles was fine in his return. Just 6.3 yards per attempt on 47 attempts, but pretty much league average passing efficiency based on his net expected points outcome. He force-fed DJ Chark 15 targets. Chark scored twice, had 104 yards. After Chark, it was Chris Conley with 8 targets, Leonard Fournette with 7, D.D. Westbrook with 6, and Keelan Cole with 5. The deep looks here, 6 for DJ Chark because he's a monster, 2 for Conley, 1 for Cole, but Foles completed only 1 of those. Foles, I think, should prove himself to be a benefit for the Jaguars offense based on today even being kind of average and what Gardner Minshew had returned over the fuller sample. I think it's kind of close, but I don't think it's crazy to think that Foles is a benefit here. Chark's role is elite right now, and I think if I'm really stacking up the Jaguars, I'm going to go back to Chris Conley, which I know is very easy for me, over D.D. Westbrook moving forward. Based on their roles, Conley's getting healthier. He's getting a lot of or enough downfield work where I'd prefer him over D.D. Westbrook and his tiny average depth of target. The Jaguars had just 9 rushes here, but Leonard Fournette played 76% of snaps. He had 8 carries for 23 yards, but had 7 targets, like I said before. His receiving work has done well to elevate his floor, even when he doesn't score. And, this is why receiving matters for a running back, because he had 34 yards and 3.5 points on 7 catches. So that's almost 7 FanDuel points. So basically a touchdown. Just because he's involved and gets some extra work through the air. I know he didn't get 7 points for his catches, but, it helps. So they're at Tennessee next week for what that's worth.
Let's talk here about DJ Chark, because I agree with you that Nick Foles overall is an upgrade for this offense, and he really did look towards DJ Chark's way really often. And we know Chark has talents. Name that salary for DJ Chark next week against Tennessee in what is probably not going to be a high-scoring game, but it isn't going to be as bad as it would have been back when the Titans were doing whatever it was they were doing with Marcus Mariota at quarterback.
Yeah, so the matchup in game environment doesn't seem to be great, but the number that I had in my head was between 68 and 7,000, so I'll split the difference and say 6,900.
Nice. I think that I would probably be like 67 just because the game environment is annoying. And I do value that more at wide receiver and quarterback than any other position. So I think that that's the main concern from a role perspective. He's awesome. And he's upgraded to $7,000 for next week. I think that's appropriate. I think that we can still use him at that number. I agree with your assessment, though, of the other guys, too, because Chris Conley is 57 and he's getting high leverage work, whereas D.D. Westbrook is not. And so Chris Conley, I think, deserves to be second on this list. Westbrook is $5,300. It's a very low salary, but I think that Conley is at least an option. I want to talk to you about Leonard Fournette as well. The snap rate went down, but his salary is still very low. It's $7,000. Is that something that would intrigue you to buy in? Because I think that I still would be there, even though he did lose some snaps again on Sunday.
Yeah, that's a good price again for someone who, even when the when the rushing isn't there, like he gets receiving work, which is a way to elevate his floor and his ceiling. And I don't know the full slate. I don't know all the running back matchups yet, but he's kind of always in the mix for like my third cash game running back at that price because he's kind of in that low 7,000 range. So I'm not completely different. I don't really view this as a huge negative for Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, he scored one touchdown all year, but he still has the 9.2 points he scored Sunday were still the fewest he's had all year. Like, that's a good floor. Even if the ceiling hasn't been there, the ceiling could be there if he scores touchdowns. So I agree that Fournette is still someone we should consider at $7,000. A trip to Puerto Rico, $6 million in prizes. FanDuel is pulling out all the stops for this year's World Fantasy Football Championship. You still have through December 1st to enter a number of different qualifiers at different price points to earn your seat at the $2.5 million live final or the $3.5 million online championship. For more information on the WFFC, visit fanduel.com/WFFC or download the app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move here to the Broncos at the Vikings. Huge comeback for the Vikings in this game. They were down, I think, like 20-0 at one point. I believe it was at the half. They were down 20 points, and somehow they won. And Stephon Diggs was a part of that because he had a tough matchup on Sunday, and he had only 5 targets, but he still had a great game. He finished with 121 yards and a touchdown. The problem is that the 5 targets are a continuation of an issue here. In the games that Thielen has either been out or limited, Diggs' market share is only 19%, which is disappointing. He is super talented, so he's so capable of big games, but the floor is still non-existent until Thielen gets back, which is disappointing. He can still have a good game, as he showed, but the floor, it's not real at this point anymore. As far as the other guys, Olabisi Johnson led with 9 targets, but turned it into 35 yards. He hasn't had more than 43 yards in a game this year, so I'll pass there. But Kyle Rudolph had yardage upside. It happened. He actually had yards after the catch and scored. It was interesting. So he and Irv Smith are both certainly options, and we should probably favor Rudolph by a hair, though Smith did have a touchdown here too. Both tight ends played more than 80% of the snaps. So it's a weird offense, and it's a bit unique in that the second and third best options in the passing game are both tight ends. And I think that that's true with it being Diggs, Rudolph, and Smith in that order. Dalvin Cook, though, is truly the team's number 2 receiver with Thielen out. He's second behind Diggs in targets in that time. He couldn't get anything going on Sunday, but Cook still had 11 carries and 6 targets. Basically hit the floor there from a yardage perspective. His ceiling and median outcomes are both very good, so no changes for me when it comes to Dalvin Cook. It is worth noting that Harrison Smith hurt his hamstring late. If he does miss time, that would be a downgrade for the Vikings defense, though they do have a bye now to get rested up. On the Broncos side, there were reports before the game that Phillip Lindsay would get extra work, and that did happen. He had 16 carries and 2 targets while playing 64% of the snaps. Royce Freeman was at 8 carries and 1 target with a 30% snap rate. Lindsay's team is awful, and that does matter, but he can get some passing down work, and there is some talent there. So I am more into Lindsay now than I was before, at least, and I'll talk to you about him in just one second. Brandon Allen had some really bad individual passes at inopportune times. He finished with negative 0.05 passing net expected points per dropback. It's kind of what you expect out of a guy in this situation. The offense will gain upside if and when Drew Lock starts, but the floor will still be low for everyone because Lock could be equally bad, but he could be better. So, range of outcomes. Tim Patrick was activated from IR and got 8 targets, but it didn't prevent Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant from getting theirs. Fant led with 11 targets. Sutton had 9. In the 3 games without Manny Sanders, Sutton and Fant both have 27% of the targets. Patrick is actually 3rd in that time, despite playing just 1 game. Sutton and Fant should still get great volume, helping to mask a bad offense. So as long as it's a decent enough game, I am totally okay using either of those guys. Patrick is worth monitoring if Locke gets a job, which he may. I don't know. I don't know if they throw him into the fire on the road in Buffalo next week. But overall, Noah Fant and Cortland Sutton are good options in a very bad offense. I want to talk to you about Lindsey, though, because in general, you've been more okay with both Lindsey and Freeman throughout this year. And what we said is that once one of them separated, we would be okay going at them. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that separation now. So is it enough for you to buy in on Phillip Lindsay for next week on the road in Buffalo?
I mean, it's a good rushing matchup against the Bills. Denver's a 5-point underdog. Do you want to guess the total in that game?
38?
36.5.
Okay.
Which I want my running backs to have a realistic shot for red zone opportunities, and that leads to scoring chances. And
you need to be in the red zone to get red zone opportunities. Yes.
Right. So and touchdowns generally come the closer you get to the goal line. So I like Lindsey's role. I'm willing to buy into the role. I'm just still not super interested in buying into the offense, especially on the road against the Bills overall.
Yeah, again, I think the evaluation of this team is that when Locke starts, they'll have more upside, but the floor will still be really bad.
Yeah.
If he starts on Sunday, it will be the Spider-Man meme. He is Josh Allen. He's just Josh Allen as a 2nd-round pick as opposed to a 1st-round pick, which is much better.
So let's say Drew Lock starts. What are you paying for Phillip Lindsay?
With Drew Lock starting, I think Lindsey's around 64-ish, right?
Okay, and so what if it's not Drew Lock?
I don't know. It's just hard for me to get really excited about a running back in that situation.
Right.
I could still go at Fant, and I could go at Sutton.
Yeah, I was asking
White,
I was trying to figure out what your.
I don't know. I just don't know if I'd use him at all.
Because he's 6,300 right now, so.
Yeah. Okay. What about you? Where do you sit there?
I might rotate him in, but I'm not going to go out of my way to target him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and we should keep a close eye on Lindsey. And I would be more inclined to use him if Locke starts. I doubt that Locke starts, given that Buffalo is a very tough environment to play in, especially make your debut. But we'll see. Let's move on here to the Saints at the Bucs, and the Saints offense rebounded in a big way here. I guess maybe not a big way, but they did rebound. What did you see in this one between the Saints and the Bucs?
I mean, not the shootout that I think a lot of people were hoping for, not by a long shot. There were 51 total points, but just not the back and forth game that we anticipated. Drew Brees was pretty great, 228 yards on 35 attempts, so not a ton of yardage, but 3 touchdowns and 3 times the NFL average in passing efficiency against the bad pass defense, but definitely bounced back after the Week 10 letdown. And he fixated his targets on Michael Thomas, who had 11. Thomas had 8 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara had 10 targets, 10 catches, 47 yards. It's 9.7 FanDuel points just as a receiver. Problematically, Jared Cook and Ted Ginn scored the other 2 touchdowns, but didn't really have targets or yardage upside to go along with it, or yardage, overall production, whatever you want to say, just wasn't there. So could have been bigger days for them if they had some more volume. But in 2 games with Brees and Kamara back, Michael Thomas has a 32% target share. Kamara's at 25%, Jared Cook 15%, Ted Ginn 9%. Everything's great for Michael Thomas. Kamara can and will overcome a 50-50 rushing split with Latavius Murray because of his receiving. He played 67% of the snaps this week. Latavius was at 43%. Jared Cook's role has been decent. He's in play when I like the Saints, and they have a good matchup. But outside of that, he doesn't have the role where you just kind of chase him regardless of the spot. Traquan Smith here played 65% of the snaps. Ted Ginn was at 57%. So they could be hard to pinpoint, which one to target. I probably will still prefer Ted Ginn straight up, but it's just kind of a dice roll for me. It's a pretty easy offense overall, though. Breeze is good. Thomas is a stud. Kamara is still usable, but never really going to be a core play when he's losing out, on half the rushing. And the other pieces overall are just kind of viable in a shootout. For the Bucs here, Jameis Winston, 313 yards on 15 attempts, 2 touchdowns, 4 picks. One not his fault, which we'll talk about in a second. I was just too afraid on deep attempts. Really killed Mike Evans, Chris Godwin here. Despite no Marshawn Lattimore, Evans had 69 yards on 8 targets. Godwin had 47 yards on 6 targets, but did score. Winston actually threw 14 times to Cameron Brate after O.J. Howard botched his only target, which led to an interception. Howard played 26% of the snaps. Brate was up at 82%, according to Pro Football Focus. So the target tree ended up being 14 for Brate, 8 for Evans, 6 for Godwin and Scotty Miller, 4 for Ronald Jones and Dare Ogunbowale. Miller, Evans, and Perriman all had 2 deep targets, so none for Godwin. The season-long target share still favors Mike Evans. He's got a better ADOT than Godwin, so I still prefer Evans straight up, unless the matchup really dictates it one way or the other. But the backfield here, I mean, Ronald Jones had been trending up, but his snap rate was 33% in negative script. Still ran 14 pass routes, still had 4 targets, but you can't get excited about a back who can play 33% of the snaps. Peyton Barber was at 20%, and Dare Ogunbowale played 48%. So, Jones had increased receiving, but that did not translate into safety in negative script. So none of these backs will be considered DFS priorities, but they are at the Falcons, now elite, now amazing defense in Week 12.
You joke, but they actually kind of are at this point. Yeah, I know. I am too. And the Bucs offense didn't give me a lot of reasons to overlook what the Falcons defense has done. What's your level of concern around this offense? Because, I mean, specifically related to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, because Ronald Jones, no. And obviously no O.J. Howard. Are you worried at all about Chris Godwin and Mike Evans?
Yes, because I don't expect their prices to be lower. I mean, if they are, then I can change my mind. But they've been both up at 8,000, which is that's always tough to swallow when there are 2 receivers.
Because for us in this house, we pay up at running back. It forces us to change our roster construction, and you need to be worth it. Michael Thomas is worth that. I will change my roster construction at times to afford Michael Thomas, but it's a little, I think that Godwin specifically, because the yardage has been so lacking for a larger and larger sample now, that's a concern to me. Cameron Brate needed 14 targets to finally get above 50 receiving yards. So congrats to him. The 2-year streak is done. But I think there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about this, Godwin specifically more so than Evans.
Yeah. So name the salary for Evans and Godwin that you would pay at Atlanta in Week 12.
Because there is the possibility for negative game script and some DGAF Jameis, which I love for Mike Evans.
Isn't that from the get-go with him?
That's true. Fair enough. Pre-game warm-ups is DGAF Jameis. I would say Evans, I would still pay 83 for him. Godwin, I would say closer to 74. I don't know if I'm overreacting there or not, though.
I don't think you are. I think Godwin was priced way up for overachieving early on based on his – I mean, he had a good role, but Godwin's 7,800 and Evans is 8,000.
Okay, so I think that Evans is very much in play there. And I think that Godwin is still overpriced, but because he can have a ceiling game still, he's not out of play, but he's not a cash game play. and he would probably be mostly just game stacks there, just because like it's hard to get to that number if you're not stacking that game.
Yep.
Let's move on here and talk about that now elite defense with the Falcons, because they mopped up last week and now they played well here too. A lot of it was because Kyle Allen was terrible, but we also know the Falcons change up their play callers on defense over the bye, so we probably don't need to avoid them yet, but we can't view guys facing them as being locks to smash anymore. We got to see this team without Devontae Freeman and Austin Hooper, and it led to a concentrated target distribution. Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley both had 8 of 31 targets. That's 26%. They both had 3 deep targets out of 6 total deep throws. Ridley blew up. Jones had 91 yards too. So both of these guys are rock solid options until Austin Hooper and Devontae Freeman get back. And even then, we should be very into them. I'm going to talk to you about Calvin Ridley at the end of this as well. As far as Brian Hill goes, our fears were legitimized. He had 15 of 21 running back carries, but he finished with just 3 targets. He also had just 38 yards from scrimmage. He played 60% of the snaps in a super positive script and ran around on 18 of 34 dropbacks. I think that if we're comparing him to Devontae Freeman, a big part of Freeman's value came from the passing down work. It doesn't seem like Hill is going to get that, at least as much as Freeman. And we know this team isn't going to run efficiently. If they were in a Civ matchup at home, sure, but it's a pretty narrow set of circumstances in which I'd really want to target Brian Hill. As mentioned, Kyle Allen here was wretched. He finished with negative 13.03 passing net expected points per dropback. He threw deep 7 times, completed 3 to the Falcons and 2 to the Panthers, which is... you hate to see it. For the full season, Allen is down to negative 0.02 passing net expected points per dropback, so it's been rough. We can still use the players in this offense because the usage is concentrated. They're a pretty fast team, but it'll be hard to ever get jazzed by using Allen himself, which I did on Sunday for the first time this year. Regrets is how I'd say that. Even with Allen being terrible, Christian McCaffrey was in the perfect FanDuel lineup. He had 24.6 FanDuel points without a touchdown. He had 70 rushing yards, 121 receiving. There's nobody else close to him right now. And I'm not sure how high is too high from a salary perspective when he's in a decent spot. Outside of McCaffrey's 14 targets, DJ Moore had 15, Curtis Samuel had 7, and Greg Olsen had 5. Moore has at least 9 targets in 5 straight games. He has 3 deep targets in all those games. In that stretch, Samuel has a 21% target share. Olsen is at 16%. Samuel and Olsen are still in play as long as they're cheap enough, but Moore is pulling away, and we should keep buying into him. I want to talk to you about Calvin Ridley, though, Brandon, because it seems like Austin Hooper and Devontae Freeman likely going to miss next week as well, and they're at home against the Bucs, who very much encourage you to throw. Name that salary for Calvin Ridley after a really impressive Week 11.
Probably around 7,000, honestly, in that spot with what he gets. I mean, he gets downfield work. His average target depth since Mohamed Sanu has been traded is 14.3 yards. He's got 32% of the air yards, 17% of the targets in that sample. I mean, Calvin Ridley is good, and he can get things done, and he can score touchdowns. And in that game environment where, again, Atlanta against Tampa Bay, probably going to run for about 30 total yards. So, yeah, I mean, I think 7,000-ish, probably right.
So when you first said 7,000, I was surprised because it was higher than I thought it'd be. But, like, I think it's right. Like, it sounds like a big number, but I think it's right. Because the biggest issue we've had with Calvin Ridley all season long has been volatility. But if you narrow this target tree and give him a higher floor, we know what the ceiling is. So I actually think that 7,000 is appropriate for Calvin Ridley based on what we've seen all year long. He's had, last week disappointing against New Orleans, but Austin Hooper played most of that game, and Austin Hooper is a big part of this offense. So I think Calvin Ridley at 7,000 would make sense, but he's 67, so we don't have to pay that much. And I think that he is a high quality option at that number. Julio Jones is $8,400. I'm okay with that. I think that Julio's role has been very good ever since Mohamed Sanu left. So I think that it's fire away at both Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. I feel better about Ridley because he's cheaper, but Julio is also, I think, a very good option at that number as well. Let's move now to the Texans at the Ravens. Yuck. Again, Deshaun Watson was tied with Lamar Jackson as my highest exposed quarterback. Didn't go well. Let's hear the good first, and then transition into my sobbing in the corner.
Yeah, I mean, this was a go-to stack for a lot of us. 48 total points. So you can't really complain too much, but not.
I'll complain.
No. If you knew that this game was
right,
48 points, you'd be like, okay, I can live with that.
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
I know where the ball's going. Whatever. It's not 58. It's not 68, but it was not very. It was pretty lopsided. Not a back and forth game. And Houston didn't score until the fourth quarter. Rushing touchdown from Carlos Hyde, who is not part of the game stacks. I can't talk about the Texans just yet, so I'm gonna stick with the Ravens and talk about Lamar being so good. 24 pass attempts, 222 yards, but 4 touchdowns. Also added 86 yards on 9 carries. He is very good against top half pass defenses based on number fires adjusted metrics, which Houston was. He's put up 0.18 passing net expected points per dropback. The NFL average against top half opponents is 0.03. The NFL average against all opponents is 0.10. So,
I thought he was only good against bad teams. What are you saying here?
I'm just. Hey man, I just report the numbers. I don't.
Twitter told me he's only good against bad defenses. I don't know.
The only drawback potentially with Lamar can be stacking, and it still kind of is, and that's rough. No Raven had more than 4 targets. I know the volume's been down, or the volume was down this week, but it's been down the past few weeks. It's a tough pill to swallow. Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown, and Mark Ingram each had 4 targets. Andrews was the only Raven to clear 37 yards. He had 75 and a touchdown. Ingram actually scored twice through the air, which I didn't even know was legally possible to happen on the football field. Marquise Brown has 4 targets in this game, just 23 yards. He had 42 air yards and has an average of 28 air yards per game in 3 games back. It could be his health. It could be the role overall. I know the pass volume's been down. Jackson's thrown 23, 17, and 24 attempts in these games, but you kind of need something more guaranteed before going heavy at Marquise Brown. I'm telling myself that I need to replay this clip in my head.
I think it's more about game script. Because again,
but he's not 100%.
No, you're right. But if those games are closer, Lamar is going to throw more often, and I think that if you project a tight game, he is a very good option. Maybe very good is strong. He is a good option if it's a tight game. We just haven't seen that. They've been blowing teams out recently. It's been awesome.
Yeah, but like I said,
they should stop that. Yeah, just Lamar. I want your numbers to be great, but if you could throw a pick or two to keep the game a little bit closer, if you could Sam Darnold this bit a little bit, keep things a little tighter, I would not be mad. You're awesome, and I want your numbers to be good. But if you could toss in a pick 6 or 2, we'd be talking.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, we're on the same page. I just want to make that clear. We need that volume to be there for Brown to really pay off, because 4 targets, even for someone who can catch a deep pass, is just not really what you're looking for. At least not me.
I will have my agents reach out to Lamar to see if we can get him to throw that pick 6.
I'm looking for. Yeah, report back on Thursday.
I will.
See what you find out.
Thank you.
Ingram scored twice receiving, like I said, played 49% of the snaps. He's maxed out at 51% of the snaps over the past 5 games. It's not even a 65, 60% snap rate. It's he doesn't really play more than half the snaps. That's rough. And this was a very positive game script, just not great. Gus Edwards played 38% of snaps, had a 63-yard touchdown, 8 carries for him. Ingram had 13. For Mark Ingram, it's fair to worry about the role. This was a spot where he should have had a lot of carries, and he just didn't. He had 13. For the Texans, just 232 total yards, so not a great showing without Will Fuller. Really not a whole lot to talk about in a game where I think I'm probably just writing this off as an anomaly overall. Deshaun Watson, just 160.
I would say it's not an anomaly. I would say it's an anomaly for the Texans offense. I would say it reflects the in-season improvements of the Baltimore defense.
Yeah, I'm just talking specifically about the Texans.
Yeah, cool.
I don't think I've seen anything that really changes how I feel about Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins. But really, after that, I mean, what other Texans did we really play? And again, Will Fuller.
I've used Darren Fells a couple of times and I hate myself for it, so I'll mention that. I'm not proud.
Yeah.
I've done it though. We've all done things we're not proud of. We've all made mistakes.
Yes, we all played Brian Hill. On the season, Watson is 8th in passing down expected points per dropback, even with this game baked in. He fixated on DeAndre Hopkins, who had 12 targets and a team-high 80 air yards. Nobody else had more than 27. Kenny Stills had those 27 on 7 targets. No other receiver had more than 3 targets. Since week 7, without Fuller, DeAndre Hopkins has a 38% target share. Stills is second at 16%. Duke Johnson's third at 13%. So Hopkins has more than half of the deep targets. Stills is at 21%. So really, like I said before, this offense is just Hopkins and Watkins for me. Some stabs maybe of Kenny Stills until Will Fuller returns. But again, I'm not off of Deshaun and DeAndre after this game.
No, I agree. This happens. Like we saw with the Saints last week, and that was at home against a worse defense. They're fine. So I agree. I think that the Texans are still very good. I think that I want to just reiterate what you said about Mark Ingram because he scored twice as a receiver, 49% snap rate. He had 4 targets. Now I think was his highest target. I don't think it's Sonny Michel. But he doesn't get passing down work. So the odds of scoring a touchdown are high, but when you're as expensive as Mark Ingram is, you need a lot more than a touchdown. He got 2 here. And again, that's within his range of outcomes, but the expectation, the median outcome and the ceiling are not what you need out of a guy at his salary. If he stays as high as he was $7,500 on Sunday. They're not in the main slate next week, but
yeah,
I think that what you said is right.
He had 4 targets in week 3. So that was the only time. He had 2 games with 3 targets, but surprisingly scored twice, but no red zone carries this week, which, I mean, it's fine if you score twice through the air, but.
Right. And Gus is still getting work. He busted off a long play, so that's not going to change, I would say. Let's move now to the Cardinals. Combine the 2 names. The Cardinals at the 49ers, where Jimmy Garoppolo had some bad throws in this game, but he also did not have his left tackle, did not have his all-star tight end, and his top wide receiver was limited the whole time, and Garoppolo overall played really well. It seemed like he was struggling earlier in the year, and I think that makes sense because he's coming off a torn ACL. I think we're seeing him pick things up, and that should get better as they get healthier. So my interest level in Jimmy Garoppolo in fantasy now is higher than it's been all year, especially once they get Joe Staley back and George Kittle back. We got Tevin Coleman without Matt Breida here and did nothing. He had 12 carries and 4 targets while playing 49% of the snaps, the exact same number as Raheem Mostert. So it's kind of what we expected. He just didn't convert, and Jeffrey Wilson Jr. was the guy who scored the game-winning touchdown on, I believe, his only snap. So Coleman can have big games, as we saw earlier this year, but the duds are possible too. He's kind of actually like Mark Ingram, I guess, in a lot of ways. So go at Coleman in the right spots, and this did seem like one of those spots, but even in those right spots, the floor will still be low. So I think I made a mistake and I had much more Tevin Coleman. I was at 31%. I had more than I should have on Sunday. With Manny Sanders being limited and George Kittle out, Deebo Samuel again got big volume. He had 10 targets with 3 deep and 1 in the red zone. He will lose targets when Kittle and Manny are healthy, but it seems like Deebo has earned a role even when they are back. So arrow is up for Deebo, and we can consider him as they get healthier as long as he doesn't get too expensive. And I think the situation for the 49ers passing offense is a lot better than it was earlier in the year, where we know the targets will go to Kittle, they'll go to Manny, and they'll go to Deebo once those guys are healthy. So no longer the rotation purgatory that it was earlier on. Before the game, Cliff Kingsbury said that Kenyon Drake and David Johnson would be in a committee, and they were not. Johnson played 13% of the snaps and did not touch the football. Drake had 16 carries and 7 targets on 88% of the snaps. The Cardinals have a bye now, which means that Johnson may get healthier, but so could Chase Edmonds. If Drake were to keep this role, he would be a valuable DFS play. but I have no idea how to handle this freaking team. And I'm not even going to guess. I don't know. Christian Kirk, though, did continue to get fed with 9 targets. Drake was the only other guy with more than 5. In 4 games since returning, Christian Kirk has 27% of the team's targets and 37% of the deep targets. He is a beast, and we should be very willing to use him. You can use Larry Fitz if it's an elite matchup, but he basically needs a ceiling game to pay off. I think that's kind of where we're at with Larry Fitzgerald as of right now. I want to talk to you about Debo, though, Brandon. I think that my take is that I am going to be okay with him even when Kittle and Manny get back. And it seems like Kittle will probably be back next week, at least based on the way that he sounded. Manny kind of played through his stuff this time around, too. They're not on the main slate next week, but broadly, are you willing to use Debo Samuel even when those guys get back?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know what his target share will look like, but we see teams that have, it's kind of the norm. Sorry, I'm going to talk around this, but like Michael Thomas is at like a 33% target share. He's kind of one of the only guys who are up there. It used to be that was kind of the norm, but now it's more, getting 2 or 3 guys, 20% target shares, like 20 to 25 at the max. So I think that this could be one of those situations. And if you get 20% of targets from a quarterback who's pretty efficient, and the defense has to worry about other options like George Kittle and Manny Sanders, I think that's good for Debo Samuel. So I'm not going to go overboard. I'm not going to overreact, but I'm not, I wouldn't write him off even with Sanders and Kittle back.
There are 3 viable members of this passing game now, and there was 1 at the beginning of the year. So I think that things have gotten a lot better. And part of that is because Garoppolo is now playing better than he was, but also just, narrowing things down helps a lot. Let's move here to the Bengals at the Raiders, and not a whole lot happened here, Brandon. What'd you see in this game?
It was a 17-10 game, a win for the Raiders. Just didn't really feature a whole lot to talk about. We did see Josh Jacobs get 23 carries and 3 targets for 124 total yards. Didn't score. That really crushed his fantasy production overall, especially at an $8,000 price tag. Played 64% of the snaps. His average snap rates over the past 4 games, or prior 4 games, had been 55%. Things are looking good for Jacobs overall, but if he were to be priced around $8,000 again, he's going to be a bit overpriced for me. Derek Carr was predictably efficient against the bad pass defense, 25 of 29, 292 yards, but only 1 touchdown. Did happen to run for his first touchdown of the season. Carr, though, has been good all season in terms of net expected points. He's 5th on a per dropback basis there. His targets were primarily to his top receivers, 7 for Darren Waller, 6 for Hunter Renfrow, 4 for Tyrell Williams. Since Tyrell Williams returned in Week 8, the target shares are 19% for Waller and Renfrow, 17% for Williams, 10% for Josh Jacobs. I'm fine, like I just said. If guys are getting, 3 guys are getting like 20% of targets, this isn't quite that. This is not the most pass-heavy offense by any means. It's efficient, but you can't love any of these players unless you're into the game overall and think that the volume will be a bit heightened. Williams does rank 7th in this span in deep targets for what that's worth. 2 of 4 today for him. Waller and Renfrow each had 1 apiece. So I think it's status quo here overall. Waller's role, good for a tight end. Williams gets a little volume, but deep looks. Renfrow, low ADOT guy, but the volume's not super guaranteed, but he does have a good chance to be the lead target getter for the Raiders in a given week. They play the Jets in Week 12. I know Jim is already excited for that one. For the Bengals, not a whole lot to love. Auden Tate was carted off in the 4th quarter, unfortunately. Got hit pretty awkwardly. I don't have an update there just yet. Ryan Finley averaged 3.7 yards per attempt, lost more than half a point on a per dropback basis, 19% success rate. It actually rated out as possibly the worst performance of the season.
I think that they were planning ahead for the tank when they drafted him. Again, he's the oldest quarterback in the AFC North. I've said this like 15 times, but he's the oldest quarterback in the AFC North right now.
Yeah, I mean, just again, possibly the worst.
It's a bad situation because their offensive line is a mess. Andy Dalton was inefficient here, but it's gotten a lot worse.
Yeah, and On top of that, Jim, he spread out the targets. 6 for Auden Tate, 5 for Alex Erickson and CJ Uzama, 4 for Tyler Eifert, 3 for Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, and Gio Bernard. Boyd had 1 catch and no yards. Only Tate had more than 21 yards. Finley has just 10 deep throws through 2 games. 1 completion on them, 1 interception. The arrow's way down on this entire offense and the passing game. Joe Mixon, though, surprisingly has shown some life the past 2 weeks. He's totaled 45 carries for 200 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 targets in each game. It's not much, but it's honest work for Joe Mixon. Just always going to be hard to use Mixon in this offense. Since he hosts the Steelers in Week 12, they're 6.5-point underdogs. Going to be a rough spot for this pass offense.
What's the implied total, you think, for Cincinnati in that game? I mean, I can pull it up, I guess, but if you had to set it,
I don't know.
You are bookmaker Brandon, bookie Brandon.
Yeah.
You're setting an individual team total for the Bengals.
13.5.
It's 16.5. So I'm gonna go to the. I'm not. I guess
they're at home, so that's
Sure. Definitely matters. I think that Derek Carr is frustrating because he does not throw deep, but I think the volume against the Jets, because they're so good against the rush, and I think that at this point in the year, I think we can give John Gruden credit for being a good coach. And I feel like that's not a hot take anymore. We can give him credit for being a good coach. So I would expect their game plan to be decently pass heavy against the Jets next week. I think that it's what you said, where it's hard to feel good about anybody here. Is Waller number 1 for you because he fills tight end?
Yeah, by default, I think.
Yeah.
Although I don't know what his price is going to be.
So next week, again, they're on the road facing the Jets. Tyrell is 64. I think he's overpriced at that number. Yeah. He's getting deep work. Hunter Renfrow is $5,900. Sorry, I slipped up there. Darren Waller is 62. He was around 7,000 earlier. 62 is actually a pretty good number.
Yeah, he was 67 this week? 66?
He was 69 the week before that. So 67 this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
If he were around that again, I would be hesitant. But $6,200 for Waller. His target share is way down, but still relative to tight ends, it's a very good situation.
And his salary has come down to reflect the changes. I'd said that I was okay with Ryan Griffin at 56, but it's only a $600 difference between him and Waller. I think that's
tough. Yeah,
it puts Waller in play for sure in a game that I know I'll like. As far as Derek Carr goes, he is $7,400, the exact same number as Sam Darnold. That's about appropriate. He's kind of Alex Smithing it a bit this year, where it's like he's efficient, he's been good, but he's not throwing deep, and that does limit his upside. Good floor, not a great ceiling, but I think that in this spot, I could be into him at that number. Let's move here to the Patriots at the Eagles. The Eagles did lose this individual game, which stinks for them because they're trying to make the playoffs, but it could have some implications beyond this week. Right tackle Lane Johnson sustained a concussion and could not return. With a concussion, he could be back next week, and it sounds like he thinks he will be, but Johnson is one of the best offensive linemen in all of football. They have good depth at tackle, but it'd still be a huge loss. So keep an eye on him in practice this week. Carson Wentz's splits with and without Johnson as a rookie, long time ago, but they were ginormous. So keep a very close eye on Lane Johnson in practice this week. Jordan Howard and Darren Sproles sat out, but Miles Sanders was interesting here. He had 11 carries and 4 targets while playing 85% of the snaps. 85% snap rate good, 11 carries, 4 targets bad, and Boston Scott had 7 carries. I still like Sanders and would be okay using him if Howard were to miss more time, but it's hard to get enthused that they're still going to shuffle Boston Scott in there. Both the floor and ceiling will be limited as a result. With Alshon Jeffrey out, Jordan Matthews made his re-debut with the Eagles, and he had 6 targets. Zach Ertz had 11, Nelson Aguilar had 9, and Dallas Goedert had 6. Ertz looks like he will be a target monster, again, if Jeffrey misses more time. Then Aguilar would clearly be second in the pecking order for right now. Goddard is a punt option at tight end as long as his salary reflects that. I think he's a very good tight end option. We need to make sure his salary does not get too high because I know he's had some interest the past couple of weeks. There was wind in this game, so take all stats with a grain of salt, but Tom Brady had negative 4.63 passing net expected points here. He has a pretty poor supporting cast right now, so I don't think this is a surprise. But it does mean that this offense is lacking a bit of the juice it usually has. Brady didn't complete any of his 6 deep attempts, and again, wind did influence that, but it's a struggle right now for sure. N'Keal Harry made his debut, and it spread things out behind Julian Edelman. Edelman had 10 targets. That was his 5th consecutive game with double digits. He's awesome. James White was second in targets with 7. Nobody else had more than 5. Philip Dorsett had 5. Then Harry and Mo Sanu both had 4. So we may have gotten, I'll put this one on me. I may have gotten a bit overexcited about Sanu's week 9. He got banged up here, didn't do much. I know he's on the sidelines for a bit, testing out his lower leg. But Harry is there to take a bit away. So Edelman is really the one guy here we can feel good about. With Harry playing, Dorsett's snap rate, I don't know why I said that weird. Dorsett's snap rate slipped to 46%, while Harry was at 43%. Sanu played 55%, again, partially influenced by the injury. So Sanu is, outside of Edelman, the top guy among these 3, but Harry is on the rise and could gain a larger role as we go along. Sony Michel had 10 of 20 running back carries. He added 4 targets. The 4 targets were his most this year, but he ran only 8 routes. It's a fluke. Do not buy in. He also played only 22 of 71 snaps. So I hate this backfield. I'm not going to touch it. It's basically Edelman. And then I don't know. I think that's where we're at with them for right now. I want to talk to you about this backfield, Brandon, because Jordan Howard, I think they said, is potentially in danger of missing next week too. Miles Sanders, good snap rate, and we know that he will get targets, and sometimes they will be creative targets, but the volume is still a concern here. So what would you put Miles Sanders at? Where would you want him at, assuming Jordan Howard sits out again next week?
So they are 2-point home favorites on Seattle.
Okay.
Total is 49 points. That is quite a good game environment. 85% of the snaps for someone as athletic and talented as Sanders. I would be willing to pay up to about 63, 64 before I really started to hesitate more. I know the volume wasn't there, but the snap rate is it's more important to me, I think.
I think that so we were talking about buckets on Thursday. I think that he's in a similar bucket to Devin Singletary if Howard misses more time. And I said 65 for Devin Singletary, so I'll put Sanders at 65 too. I think that that's a good number for him, given what we've seen.
You're going to be happy.
56, my gosh. So while I'm talking to Lamar Jackson about trying to throw some pick sixes, I will talk to Jordan Howard and say, buddy, stingers stink. Let's take another week here. Chill out. Watch this game. Eat some popcorn, chill out. And let Miles Sanders do his thing. Because 56 accounts for my concerns, and that'd be a really fun spot. So it was not a good game, and the usage itself was not good, but the other factors, the underlying factors are good enough where at $5,600, sign me up. I'd be into that for sure. Let's move here to the Bears at the Rams, this Sunday night game. It was really bad, Brandon. I don't know if that's like hot take alert, but it was a bad game. What'd you see here?
Yeah, I thought I went back in time to Thursday night or something with this game. Neither team had 300 total yards or 200 yards passing. The Bears had the ball for 32 minutes, scored 7 points. I mean, the Rams, I think at least it makes sense with their offense a little bit. I mean, I know that their offensive line's banged up, but they had no Brandon Cooks due to his concussion, and then also Robert Woods was scratched due to a personal matter. So that is not great. But those absences didn't lead to volume for anyone else because Jared Goff threw just 18 times. He was efficient on those despite not netting a touchdown. Could have had a long touchdown to Cooper Kupp, but I mean,
he also had one wiped out by penalty.
I should just ask Jim if there were any other positives about Jared Goff. But I mean, look, he's a matchup dependent play. That's That's what he is. That's fine. A lot of quarterbacks are. That's what DFS is basically all about. So that's just kind of how we should treat him. We probably can't read too much into these target numbers because of Woods' absence. I would assume he's back next week because it wasn't injury related, and because of this game just being what it was overall. But Josh Reynolds did lead with 6 targets. Cooper Kupp, Todd Gurley, Mike Thomas, not Michael Thomas, each had 3. This is now the other Michael Thomas.
Do you remember back during the draft process? They were in the same draft.
Mm-hmm.
There was a segment of #draft Twitter that called this good Mike Thomas to clarify which one was which. And whoops,
yeah,
prospecting is very hard.
Yeah,
I think that's the bigger takeaway here. But whoops.
Yeah, I'll keep my Kalen Ballage takes. I do.
No. I like Marcus Mariota. This is not saying that I am not immune to these terrible. I liked Brad Kaya, for God's sake. Like no, I am not immune to this. I'm just saying it's very hard.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately for this Mike Thomas, hopefully this Mike we'll just call him this Mike Thomas.
Other Mike. He also dropped a ball on the sideline. That was a dime from Jared Goff. I'll toss in more positives here. How dare you ruin Jared's stats, Mike? Come on.
Yeah, Gerald Everett had only 1 target. He didn't seem to be 100%. But Reynolds has played at least 88% of the snaps the past 3 games. He will and has had a role without Brandon Cooks. He's going to be relevant, but he'll never really be a core play in DFS unless it's like a huge shootout spot. Cooper Kupp started the season with a 28% target share through 5 games. That's down to 20% since. It's worth noting. It's 6.2 targets per game. It's just he's not being used the way that he was early on. And again, Gerald Everett, not fully healthy entering this game, played 14 snaps, so just 26%. We'll just have to monitor his health. This team could have a lot of openings, but Woods could be back. Everett could be getting healthier, so it's almost like a wait and see. But I do think that the arrow is pointing down on Kupp and up on Josh Reynolds. Speaking of upward pointing arrows, I think we can fix one of those by Todd Gurley's names. He played 77% of the snaps, giving him 74 and 77% the past 2 games, so that's nice. In addition to his 3 targets, he had 25 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. 3 of the 4 red zone carries between he and Malcolm Brown. Over the past 2 games, he has 5 of 6. So I think things are looking up entering a Monday night matchup with the Ravens for Week 12. For the Bears, this was just I don't know. Mitchell Trubisky left the game due to what is being called a hip injury, but he was really bad before that. So he's 33rd out of 39 qualified passers on the full season based on Number Fire's efficiency metrics. Chase Daniel had 4 attempts baked in here. But despite 47 total pass attempts, Allen Robinson had just 6 targets, facing some coverage from Jalen Ramsey. Reverse revenge game? I don't know there.
Is it a revenge game or is it like you'd think they'd be friends, right?
I don't know. I mean, I would think
like Jalen Ramsey, I think is the type of dude, and this is like fine, who probably doesn't have a lot of friends in the football field intentionally. So I don't know. It's it's not a friendship game. I don't know. We'll workshop this. Our team is on it.
Yeah. Instead, it was Taylor Gabriel with 14 targets, Anthony Miller with 11 leading the way. Tariq Cohen also had 6 targets, scored the Bears' lone touchdown. I mean, Robinson has a 25% target share on the full season, 35% of the air yards. He's got a strong workload, but the production's just not really there because his quarterbacks still aren't very good. So Allen Robinson, hopefully he gets a good quarterback eventually. Since their Week 6 bye and Taylor Gabriel's return to the lineup, Robinson's at a 24% target share. Cohen and Gabriel are at 17%. Miller is at 14%. Robinson and Gabriel are around 30% of the deep targets. It's not really enough for anyone other than Robinson. And again, the production just not really been there. And then in the backfield, David Montgomery played 47% of the snaps, 3 targets, 14 carries for him. Tariq Cohen, 6 targets and 9 carries on a 61% snap rate. So a better adjusted opportunity mark than Montgomery had. They're 7.5-point favorites over the Giants next week. So we should be able to go back to David Montgomery, but this offense is just sad.
Okay, so first with the Rams. I was very pessimistic about this offense heading into the game because of the offensive line injuries. And Chris Collinsworth during the game gave their offensive line a lot of credit for their run blocking, but they were actually really good in pass protection too. Goff averaged 3.11 seconds to throw and didn't take a single sack. So the offensive line in pass protection is actually really good. So I thought that was a positive thing for the Rams. It won't matter if McVay doesn't trust the passing offense enough to actually open it up. But I think that I was impressed with the offensive line and what they did in this game. And they've got their right tackle is a rookie out of Oklahoma, and that offensive line was among the best in football last year. Their right tackle, Rob Havenstein, was playing terribly this year too. So maybe this is an upgrade. And I think it's worth mentioning that they were good in this game. As far as the Bears go, can we trust this passing offense if Trubisky plays against the Giants? I want to use Allen Robinson because he's good. And his market shares for most of the year have been good. And the Giants don't have a shutdown type corner like Jalen Ramsey. So I want to go at Allen Robinson, but it's a bad situation. What's your read on him heading into that game?
So the way that I've viewed Allen Robinson pretty much all year is the workload's great. He's getting high leverage looks. He's getting a lot of the team's looks, but the production isn't always there because the targets aren't the balls aren't efficient.
Yeah.
And that's also led to his being overpriced. And I already saw his price for this week, but
is it bad?
In this spot, what would you pay for Allen Robinson?
Who's starting? Is Chase Daniel starting?
Take your pick. Do one of both.
Because Trubisky could very well be hurt. If he's playing hurt, that downgrades the entire team. So 65 if Trubisky plays, 67 if it's Daniel.
So he's $7,500.
What?
I'm not going to be able to play Allen Robinson. It's not going to happen.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So David Montgomery turned his ankle in practice this week. He did play, but it seemed like they definitely were trying to lessen his workload a bit by having Tariq Cohen play more. Let's say David Montgomery is able to get back into full practice this week. Where would you be at with him at home against the Giants?
Probably 67.
Might be a little bit lower. I think he's around 65 because the offense is so bad.
Yeah.
He's 66. That's fine. That is what it is. But I think this offense, I don't want to, it's so easy to pile on Trubisky, and that just seems mean because clearly he's going through some very difficult issues right now. And he could be hurt. But if he keeps playing like he has and he is hurt, it's hard to expect that playing level to change, which stinks because he's been people have been really mean to Mitchell Trubisky this year. So I feel bad for him. But I think that it's hard to have faith in this offense right now. If he does start next week is the way that I'd phrase that. The Rams face the Ravens. It's on Monday night, but the Ravens defense has been a lot better. So I still would not expect big things out of them, but I feel better about them given the way specifically the offensive line played on Sunday night than I did entering Sunday night. That is all the time that we have for today. I think that it's not the most impactful slate as far as takeaways by any means, but I think that it sets up well for a really intriguing Week 12. It is a gym slate because we get Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold both in good spots. So I am excited to break things down on Thursday right here once again on the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. To get that podcast right as it is posted, make sure you subscribe to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure you leave a rating and review the podcast as well, and we appreciate those of you who have done so already. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, got spit in my mouth, sorry, which is where it's supposed to be, but still choked on it. Where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald from the video side of things here today. As always, thank you, Cal. Thank you to everyone for tuning in on the FanDuel YouTube page and for tuning in to this podcast today. Hopefully, Week 11 was good to you, and hopefully we can get you set for Week 12 on Thursday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by Number Fire.